Good evening. The Norfolk Historic Buildings Group is hosting a visit to Norfolk by the Vernacular Architecture Group, and as part of our preparation for that visit, I've been researching houses in Norwich, including those in the Cathedral Close. The Cathedral Close was part of Norwich Priory from 1096 until the Reformation. In 1538, the monastery was transformed into a secular community with a dean, prebends and canons rather than monks and prior, and the priory church became the cathedral. This resulted in substantial changes within the close, including the houses. So I hope to give a brief glimpse of these changes. I draw extensively on the work of Roberta Gilchrist in her book Norwich Cathedral Close, and of Ian Atherton and others in the Norwich Cathedral, this book here, and Chris King's recent book on Norwich houses and society in Norwich. It gives an excellent account of the houses in the city. Also great help are George Plunkett's wonderful collection of photographs taken from the 1930s to the 1980s, which can be seen on his website. John Fielding's also got some wonderful aerial photographs of the close, and the Norfolk Historic Environment Records has information too. I'm going to start with the prior's lodging. While the majority of the monks lived communally, senior members of the community, such as the bishop, the prior and the infirmary, had their own accommodation. The prior's lodging, down here, is to the east of the cloister, which is still there, and what was the chapter house, the chapter house, the dormitory, and the refectory of the priory. In the late 13th century, in 1284, a large open hall was built with service areas, and a solar or private chamber was built. It was constructed in brick rubble with some stone dressings. Entry to the prior's lodging was from a passage in the dark entry in the cloister. That's the picture on the right, the door on the right, and by an arch on the west front of the lodgings. You can see the arch with the nice stonework around it. This hall was 14.3 metres and was lit by windows on each side. Two with geometric tracery remain in the north wall. These photographs were taken during a tour of the close in 2011 with Roland Harris, the cathedral archaeologist. The windows can be spotted just above in the top photograph there, from the north side of the prior's hall. I've used George Plunkett's photograph taken in 1989 because it shows the windows before the foliage had a chance to grow and obscure this view. The prior's lodgings were modest compared with those at Ely and Durham, for example. But at 14.3 metres long, the hall was earlier and much larger than those surviving in the city. Chris King, for instance, has the Strangers' Hall as the largest hall in the city at 10.3 metres, with Suckling Hall at 9 metres. In comparison, the Historic Buildings Group found that the largest hall at Hempnell measured 6.5 metres in length. In the early 16th century, there was a major refurbishment. This was probably prior to the visit in 1520 of Cardinal Wolsey and Queen Catherine. Prior Catton had a ceiling inserted in the hall. This is here above this window here. So it's severing the tracery of the side windows and concealing the painted beams of the earlier roof, as shown on this internal view of the window. A chamber was created above the hall, approached by a stone staircase, a very fine stone staircase, and Rebecca Gilchrist has a photograph of it on page 163 of her book. There were also changes in the 17th century. So between 1660 and 1670, that's after the restoration of the monarchy, Dean Cross had the building remodelled again, and amongst other things, the distinctive crow-step gables, which you can see in both of those top photographs. The ruins of the monks' latrine, which lay quite close to the prior's lodgings, were removed, and its north wall was reused as an external wall of the deanery. And this can be seen on these two views here. So on the left here are the arches for the monk's latrine. This one here filled with a door, this one here with windows. And on the right of this picture here of Plunkett's would have been where the hall was, and so at this end you would have had the windows of the hall and the windows of the rooms above the hall. The Plunkett's photograph of 1983 also shows a hillman hunter. And Gilchrist has a very good picture, a drawing of this east wall by Philip Thomas in her book. Now the prior's lodgings continued to be altered in the 18th and 19th century as new deans made their mark. And one change, which I thought was worth noting, was the creation of a substantial wine cellar, and in recent times the ground floor of the deanery has been made into meeting rooms. So here we see the prior's lodging changing its form over the years in lines with fashions in architecture and how buildings were used, but it retained its function as the office or the residence of the cathedral's senior manager. Other buildings associated with the prior changed in both form and function. Some buildings which supported the communal life of the monastery, such as the dormitory and the latrines and the refectory, were pulled down, providing a valuable source of building material. Or they were incorporated into later buildings and modified to suit the new circumstances. And one set of buildings which were repurposed were the granaries, and these can be seen here on the top side of Rebecca Gilchrist's plan, both the wheat and the malt granary. So we have here building numbers 51 to 56 in the close. So starting with the bottom picture here, we've got number 51, which was the house of Granarian, with it had a chimney at that far side there, giving indication of that there was probably a fireplace in that room there, in that house there. But without grain to store and a communal life to support, these buildings were no longer needed. So they were subdivided and had floors inserted and are now private houses. Number 53, with the higher roof there on the right-hand side of that top picture there, collapsed during restoration work in 1904 and was rebuilt. The numbers 54 and 55 next to it, you can see number 54 has got its number on the gate very helpfully for us, were probably built and functioned as a single entity. And there was a loading bay at the back of number 55. Number 56 here on the left was built up against the gable of number 55. And it was built in two sections. There's a flint and brick section to the right, which is 16th century, and a brick and reused stone section to the left, which is 17th century. And there's a lease which confirms that this was the chamber of the steward of the manor. The monastic Brewhouse and Bakehouse, which are now numbers 30 to 33 on the east side of the lower close, were also repurposed. So there's a general view of it on that top left-hand side. Alderton reports that the Brewhouse was leased out and was run as a tavern. There were complaints that it had become a tippling house, the resort of all evil and naughty persons. These complaints continued into the 17th century, with residents complaining of illegal alehouses, blocked drains, and festering rubbish. Sounds a bit like current complaints about what happens on the Prince of Wales Road, not too many metres away. The medieval range was constructed in rubble flint, 1 root deep, and some medieval fabric remains. So if you look at this lower picture here, another Plunkett photographs, this one taken in 1936, you can see an arch here on the left hand side indicating another loading bay. I've used his photograph because the people who live in number 31 there have wonderful foliage and bushes and things there which obscures the view. Number 32 and 33, which is on the right hand side here, were remodelled by John Ringhall of Easton and his wife Anne in 1682, and there's a date plaque up there. They added a substantial front range to the single room wide medieval block, creating 2 houses, each with mirror image plans, with a central doorway and staircase in both cases. Another example of changes to monastic building is number 49, Hook's Walk, sometimes called the Gardener's Chequer. Gilchrist suggests that it was one of several buildings along this lane which was the offices of minor cathedral officials and servants, and Hook Lane led to the gardens of the monastery. The house probably started as a single-storey range of 14th to early 15th century, with blocked lancet windows, or niches possibly. It was made into 2 stories and virtually rebuilt in about 1600 and then amended later. It's got, as you can see, it's got irregular windows with an off-centre door with these fluted pilasters. They're very much the fashion, I think, at that point in the close. And I put this picture below of Plunkett's because it shows that it was rendered when he was taking his photograph in 1936. But we'll come back to that picture later. Another example of the changes to monastic building in the close. Another change to the monastic close was the new houses that were built. So this one here, the Prebends House number, and I'm showing you number 71, it was built because new housing was required for the prebends, the canons and the singing men who replaced the monks. So 6 new houses were built for the prebends, and number 71 is the only remaining house. It's to the south of the Erpington Gate, as you can see in this top photograph, and it's close to what was the bell tower, and it dates from 1626 to 28. It was later rented out to lay tenants, and like many of the buildings in the close, it's now part of Norwich School. Plunkett's photograph, taken in 1937 here from the tower, shows the position of number 71. I'll try and mark this one here. Next to the Erpington Gate, and I think this is an interesting photograph because it shows the close and buildings in the close in relation to Tombland here and St George's and the city beyond. Now there were other houses built in the close to lease. This one that survives, because many of them didn't survive, but one that survives is this one, number 69, Barets House. It was built in about 1549 next to the Carnary Chapel, which you can see here on the left. It was built a brick and flint ground floor with a jettied upper story here. And it's got, much later, a brick gable, which gets built about 110 years later. I was interested that the lease of this building here placed restrictions on women living in this house, suggesting that even in 1549, so we're talking about 9 years after the Reformation, that the adjustments to the idea of the marriage of the clergy could be slow to get through to various people. It's now part of the Norwich School. And here you can see it as part of the Norwich School, with the gable end having been painted. The 17th century saw a gentrification of the close, especially after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. Some buildings which interrupted the views of the cathedral were removed, and there was landscaping, tree planting and paths laid out to create what was considered to be an appropriate and genteel recreational setting. There was new building and the reworking of buildings by the upper clergy and also by city residents and rural gentry. So number 30 to 32, which we've already looked at, is an example, so here on the right, is an example of that gentrification. And so is this one here on the bottom left, which is number 50, which was constructed in 1664 with those columns at the front. And those columns are now not terribly visible because the hedge has grown up, which is why I've used Plunkett's picture there. And the other place where I thought I'd talk about the gentrification is in the Almonry, and that is a picture from the Almonry above there. The Almonry was positioned inside the Ethelbert Gate. It was here, at a safe distance from the church and the cloister, that the Almonry dispensed alms to the poor of Norwich and provided hospitality for the lower ranks of travellers and pilgrims. There was a hall, a stables, cookhouse, a granary, and the almoner's office and residence. So, having a look at some of these buildings in date order. Let's start with number 6. This had been the almoner's office and residence, and the top photograph here, another wonderful Plunkett photograph here, shows on the top right hand side, I'll try and indicate that to you up here, look, is this one here, is a view of this building, a sort of strange sort of L-shaped building with these wonderful gabled arches on both the east side, as on the right hand side, and also on the north side, and also on the east side, which you can see if you go down St Faith's Close. That's where you get that particular view. Now, there's materials here from other buildings being used, but also externally, as you can see, but also internally. So Gilchrist thinks that there's a 16th century door from the Prior's Hall, which was reused in that building. And I chose that Plunkett picture at the top left there because not only does it show you the number 6 very clearly, but it also gives a nice view of the close, and particularly of this building here, which is built on what's now the car park next to the refectory, which was bombed in 1942 and is no longer there, hence the car park. And to the left of it, you can see the columns from the infirmary building, all that remains of the infirmary building. And it shows just how close the bombs were getting to the cathedral in 1942. The other two houses I thought to have a look at in the Almonry are on the left-hand side here, numbers 3 and 4, and this is on the position of the granary, the Almonry granary, which gives you a sense of just how big this granary was. It's a 3-storied red brick house, 11 bays, built for Jeremy Vine and his wife Susan. And it's got a date of 1701 on the top here, so 1701 across the top there. And there's some 18th century features still internally. Now, Jeremy Vine was an alderman and the mayor of Norwich, and it's an example, I think, of the elite of the city building and moving into the close. Now, number 2 here on the right-hand side is a slightly later building. It's a mid-18th century building, and the workhouse superseded the Almonry buildings here post-Reformation, but that was eventually moved out of the close, and this 3-storey house was built in red brick with a central doorway, steps up, ionic columns there, and this pediment, and I understand that those pediments are pretty rare to see in Norfolk. There are some in the basement. There are some remains of a medieval undercroft, and as you can guess from the site of this pupil going to that building, it's another of the Norwich school buildings. So a quick word about building materials. As we've seen, there's a lot of stone being used in these buildings, and in that sense I think they're quite distinctive from the buildings in the city. So at number 6 you see the stone. Here, the Steward's Hall, you've got a lot of stone. The Prior's Hall too, and at the top left hand you've got the other view down St Faith's Lane of the number 6 with some nice brickwork, and there's other good pattern brickwork in the close as well. And the other building material which you see being used, well, it was used from an early date in the close, but here we can see it being used in the 16th century at number 69, that top left picture there, on the ground floor of the building. And from the 17th century, you've got increasing evidence for brick, for facades and for the whole of the height of the building, as in 32, 33, which you can see at the left-hand side here, and at on the right-hand side at numbers 3 and 4 in 1701. And number 2 that we've just seen, which is, again, mid-18th century. And as a result, the use of this brick means that the buildings in the close begin to look more like those elsewhere in the city, and it has that more secular appearance. But I think it's worth noting these gables, but I'll come back to those gables in a moment. Now, many of the houses we've considered so far are large houses, and there are smaller houses in the close which show some interesting changes over time. And so I've just picked out, for illustrative purposes, this collection of houses here from 27 to 30. It's on the road going down to the ferry. So if we start at the top left here, the Pink House. It's a 17th century 2-storey stuccoed flint house, and it probably starts as a single-storied medieval building which gets heightened in the 17th century and complete with those attics there. It's got an off-centre door and it's got the fluted pilasters. The Brewhouse here on the left fits around the gable of number 27. And this bit at the front here that you can see, the two-storied brick, is with an early window bay at the front here. It has a 17th century rear range. On the right-hand side here, we've got, on the right-hand side photograph, you've got number 29. And the frontage, the 3-bay frontage there, is in grey brick, and it's early 19th century. And it's built in front of a 16th or 17th century range with a flint and brick. And you can see something's happened to the roof line there at the back, or you could see if the picture was, if we were focused in on that picture a little bit more. It's got the 3 bays and it's got a doorway again with the pilaster and those and the pediment. And finally, at the bottom left here, what we've got here is a 16th century flint brick house with, it's got a 14th or 15th century stone doorway at the rear. And at the left, it's got another 19th century 2-story brick section that's been built on. And there's some strange arrangements happening there with the roof line. But I'll finish with something else. This is number 57, the Gothic, Victorian Gothic Canon's house. It's beyond the east end of the cathedral, near the sacrist's house, which is number 59 and 60. And it's on the site of a 19th century women's prison. And there's a date of 1862 on the chimney. Now, this house divided opinion when it was built, and it continues to do so. Ian Atherton reports that Pesner considered it a faux pas and completely insensitive to the demands of the east view of the cathedral. Betjeman, in contrast, thought it was the finest Victorian house in existence, and based on its number 57, it acquired the nickname of Heinz Hall. It's now a care home. Jolly good place to be in a care home, I would have thought. Okay, so to conclude, I've tried to give a snapshot of some of the houses in the close and to suggest ways in which they may relate to houses elsewhere in the city. In terms of their height, houses in the close and in the city rarely go up higher than a 2nd or 3rd story. Houses such as number 69 with the brick and flint ground floors with the jetty and timber first floors would look at home in the city. And this is especially the case as brick is used in features such as attics and dormers. The ceiling over the hall in the Prior's lodging in about 1520 and shifts to first floor living reflect changes happening elsewhere in the city following the fires of 1507. But there continue to be differences. There are more centrally planned houses with central doorways, such as number 32, 33 and number 2, which we've seen. And one of the few city examples of these centrally planned houses is Samson and Hercules House, built in 1627, close to the Erpingham Gates. And this was built while Christopher Jay was mayor of Norwich. And there are the gables. Do these and features such as the Prior's large hall suggest that the design of houses in the close look towards the houses of Norfolk's country gentry? Thank you.